Hey, I'm Bonnie, and I'm sitting here with Nora. We're two of the co founders of Sidekick, a realization consultancy. We focus on anything from strategy growth to people and try to help business leaders realize their dreams.
It's pretty fun.
It is.
So, another thing we do commonly as business partners, friends, we like to debate, discuss, explore, break down myths, challenge arguments, things that seem status quo.
We like to talk.
I mean, yeah, at least one of us likes to talk. And we thought other people might want to be part of the conversation. So we're going to spend some time talking about what we think are some interesting topics from a societal, but try and focus them to a business perspective. And today we're going to be jumping into one that asks, is the solution to the people, purpose, profit debate actually your leadership mindset?
Great. Let's dive in.
We're back. And with a really fun topic, or at least I think it's really fun. And maybe the best way to start it off was with a big question, because we love a question. So, what I want to put out there first is the ultimate goal of business profit? And that's probably a question that's been asked a lot over the last few decades, and not a revolutionary new question, but one, in my experience, when it's asked, gets people shifting in their seats. I've definitely been at senior leadership tables where the question's asked, and part of the room is just arguing against it. Part of the room is saying, well, of course, why are we even talking about that it couldn't be? And then part of the room was like, are we still debating this? Like, why are we even talking about it?
Yeah, and I mean, it is a big question, and the divide in the room that you're describing, I think, to me, is proof that this debate is far from settled. Right? Um, what we see in the real world when businesses hit a rough patch, so like profitability goes down, engagement really declines, or customers just choose the next best competitor.
Which happens.
Oh, it happens. It happens all the time, right? Like what I see most leaders do is immediately wanting to move to action. Like they want to think about like what's a new product that we should launch? How can we reduce costs? Do we need to change the strategy? And they're willing to throw everything overboard, right? And sometimes even worse, they just start looking for that one person that they can blame for it. But it kind of gets me thinking, what if strategy or operations is not the solution?
What?
And I know that sounds a bit silly for someone who develops strategies for a living. But hear me out. What if it's not so much about what you do, or at least kind of not that first instinct that you should kind of go to, like, what do we need to change? Um, but what if you kind of look at it more from a leadership perspective? So, how do we lead? What if the real game changer is really more in an introspective approach and thinking about kind of how do we lead and how do we set ourselves up to navigate change, opportunities, challenges? What do you think?
I mean, interesting, but I will first say, as someone who's building a livelihood based off of the importance of strategy and preach it constantly, strategy first, action second.
I sometimes just like to take it to the extremes.
Yeah, that's fair. I do know that about you. But I can't overlook that, yes, there is a place in this people, purpose, profit debate for strategies, tactics. That definitely is there. And some people are profit over everything. You need to drive the bottom line. A company doesn't exist without profit. While others are, that's an old school mindset. The way of the future is your people, is your customers, is the society in which you're operating in. Your purpose. And if you don't have people and you don't have customers, do you even have a company? So I do get that is still a healthy debate. And I do agree with you that maybe it's not over. But I do think it's an interesting one that you bring up around maybe the missing piece in the debate is less focus on the what you do, but the how you lead.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be a bit of the catch there. And there's always a catch, right? Of how do you show up? What do you do? What is that leadership mindset you are bringing to leading your organization and your people? So maybe we could take lots of twists and turns in this conversation, but to not rehash the purpose, people, profit debate, because I think that's covered in a lot of different places.
Yeah.
Maybe let's explore it from your leadership mindset and, what your preferences are and how you as a leader show up. And again, there's tons of leadership mindsets. You, of all people, are probably the best expert. I know you're DISC certified, very fancy. But you know this, right? There's tons of different styles out there.
Yep.
That
And also historically, right?
Yes,
Like
for
some
sure.
styles have had more traction during certain
For sure.
times.
For sure.
Yeah.
So maybe we can look at the leadership spectrum, so to speak, and what leadership mindset or style or approach is best used when you're prioritizing purpose, people, profit, or maybe all three of them at the same time. You want to start there?
Yeah. Let's dive in.
So on the one end of the spectrum, let's focus maybe to start on that traditional, some may call authoritative, others may call it old school approach, where they tend to focus on one thing and one thing only. A company doesn't exist unless profit and money is driving it.
Yeah.
That is what they focus on first. And those leadership styles tend to prioritize hierarchy, control, sole decision making, and you see it in a lot of different ways. And so I was curious to look up a few different examples of organizations and then leaders who typically take on this type of traditional authoritative leadership style when thriving or leading in a profit
and
first.
really focusing on profit,
Yeah,
right?
that is their thing.
The mindset of no money, no business, no jobs, no customers.
Exactly.
They're not wrong there, are they?
No, they're not. And that's the thing. It's not right or wrong, but that is the style that in my research is most commonly seen in a profit first company.
Yeah.
So when I was looking up some people, one name most people will probably know, maybe one that they don't. And I looked up some quotes and facts and research, as we should.
I love
because
your
it's
little
just
notebook.
I know all my little gems in here because it's just not about the two of us talking about what we think on a couch with two microphones. So the first one is Jack Welch. So this is going back a little bit. He was the CEO of General Electric.
Yeah.
Listen to his famous quote around the performance of his business and why it was successful. If you're not performing in this company, you're out. Results over relationship. Leaders must be tough to get results.
Wow.
Oof.
That's harsh.
You'd probably want to work for Jack if you do a good job.
Yeah, well, some might. Yeah.
Yeah. And then another common one, which people may have varying opinions about this individual, but I think it is very timely, especially over the last couple of months, is Elon Musk. You got it. And you look at what he's doing in the US government with Doge, or more recently in a business perspective when he took over Twitter, or I should say X. But there are some consistencies, which again, not right or wrong, just observations, that in a profit-first organization, the leadership style that tends to do best is one that prioritizes command, control, thinks empathy is a sign of weakness. You need to be quite forceful, direct, laser focused, and you will achieve that goal.
Yeah. And I think Elon Musk and it's very timely relevant, right? His leadership style, I think we can talk about it for 5 separate episodes. Let's not get into that. But I hear you on that style, that leadership style, and it works. It works in the short term.
Yeah.
If you ask me.
Yeah.
Like investors love it, stock prices increase, and even internally, like it's often when bonuses are paid out, dividends are paid out to shareholders. Everyone is in this celebratory vibe. We're winning, right? Like it's a competitive winning environment. And it looks like a win. No, how you can cut it whichever way you want.
When
But
those earnings reports come out, no
right,
one's unhappy about it.
no one will complain.
Yeah.
It looks like a win. It's the long term that I'm worried about in this
Mhm.
type of leadership and this kind of context. It's kind of the question of like, can you take it too far? Like, is
Mhm.
there something like too much
Mm.
profit or
Mm.
running too lean? Can you get to a moment where you're
Mm.
just squeezing too much, asking, demanding too much of your people?
Well, that's maybe a research point I should have done looking at General Electric, but I didn't. But I hear where you're coming from. That is a good point. And I do think a little bit when I was researching it of, what are some of these shortcomings in the organizations that prioritize profit. And you're right, there are some
Mm-hmm.
of those short-term wins. But this is where the saying money can't buy you happiness comes to mind, right? There are the downsides of there will be burnout, there could be disengagement, you could lose employees, you could lose customers, and like I said before, if you don't have employees and customers, do you have a company? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's exactly where the short term wins
Yeah.
start turning into like long term losses. So maybe let's take it to the other end of the spectrum,
Mm,
which some might call the more modern take on leadership. I think servant leadership is a term that's often used for that. It's kind of flipping the script.
mhm,
It's instead of focusing on profit, it's focusing on your people and purpose. So more on kind of the things that you control, the input, and then betting on or trusting that if you get that right, that profit and business results will automatically flow from
mm.
that, right? So it's servant leadership. The person that comes to my mind is Satya Nadella, who at
Oh, yeah,
Microsoft
yeah.
I think it's a while ago, like in 2014, he took over Microsoft, and at that time there was this real toxic competitive environment that was created. And what he did was he literally flipped that on its head, right? So he started focusing on employee well-being,
Mm,
employee engagement, collaboration, had a more of an empathetic
mhm,
leadership style. Um, and I would say not without results,
yeah.
right? So he turned the company from a 300 billion company to over 2 trillion.
Oh, wow.
And I cannot even count the zeros in that.
Well, and I mean, he's a great example, and as you're talking about this, I think of, like, my own journey as a leader, and when I was in a role supporting a team that didn't have a whole lot of, like, numeric results, like,
Hmm.
what you're saying, I can really see I leaned in on that, right? And one leader that came to mind, and I'm a big fan of his, so I'll try and rein it in a little bit. You might be a big fan of his too. We might have his book around here
Ooh.
somewhere because he is also Dutch, but it's the former CEO of Unilever, Paul
Yeah.
Polman.
Yep.
And he became kind of notorious, and he has a manifesto about net positive. He has a book about being net positive. And really, the question across both of them that I take away that he challenges businesses say, is society, is the world better off because your company's in it? And I think
Yeah.
that's such
I
an
like that.
interesting thing to think about. And there's two things, both his book or manifesto, I can't remember where they came from, but he has one instance where he was facing declining profits,
Hmm.
financial instability at
Yeah.
Unilever, and was in a meeting with his board that clearly they were very profit first board, facing those challenges and asking a lot of questions. And he quite confidently said, I am not in this. Unilever is not in it for short term success. We're in it for long term sustainable growth and societal impact to the best that we can do it. And they took a bet on him, and it turned out
Hmm.
Unilever's brand reputation skyrocketed. Their profits ended up skyrocketing when he started to focus on those purpose and people elements first. And I wonder if his board was unhappy about it once they saw the success.
Right. Yeah. And that is really interesting. And I think it begs the question of like what makes that leadership style
Mm,
so different. And again, I think it starts with putting people first, purpose first,
mhm,
and profit. I wouldn't even say second. It's just a different approach. Like where you put your energy is more on the input
mhm,
and then kind of with doing the right things long term that will also lead to profit or like
Yeah.
financial or business success. So going back to that servant leadership, those are the leaders that really believe that they're here to serve a greater purpose, right? And they're closer to kind of their own impact. It's about setting their team up for success, looking at what people really love doing,
Yeah.
where their passion is, where their own purpose alignment lays, and growth and development, and really kind of setting them up. And maybe it's my turn to do some fangirling here, but I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek.
Shocker. I could have
His book is
predicted that
probably
one.
also somewhere around here. What he says is, and I think that's from his Leaders Eat Last book. Great leaders sacrifice numbers to save people, and poor leaders sacrifice people to save numbers. And I think that really, really hits home. Speaking of numbers, there's also the research that backs it up, right? Like when you look at employee engagement, 90% of the employees in purpose-driven companies are engaged. Over 32% at the more, call them traditional companies.
That's,
right?
that's a big difference.
It's a stark difference, right? So, and I think great, like your employees are engaged. What does that buy you, right? Like I hear the critics already. But then there's Gallup, who over and over again kind of shows in their research that the higher employee engagement also leads to higher profitability. And I think the number is somewhere around like 23% more profitability for companies that have a high employee engagement. So it can be done.
Yeah. And, going back to the first one, that traditional authoritative definitely has its place. In this one, it sounds like it's a bit more favorable because it focuses, there's that profit benefit, that long-term financial success, but with the short-term people and purpose focus. So it just begs the question then, why isn't everybody doing it? I'm like, what are we missing?
Yeah, great question. Honestly, I think because it's hard. It's really hard. It asks people or requires leaders to focus on that long-term strategy in a world where short-term wins are rewarded, right?
Yeah,
So
that's hard.
It's really hard to really stand up for that, stand out doing that, right? And then in addition to that, I feel like purpose and purpose-driven companies has become a term that's kind of overly used and also misused, if you ask me, right? Like I always think about the companies that say that they're purpose driven, but in reality, all they do is they transfer a large sum of money at the end of the year to a large charity. And don't get me wrong, that's also very much needed, but that doesn't make you a purpose driven company.
They're not living and breathing it, 360, everything.
It's kind of lacking that hard work, hard work to really get it right and invest in that long term. And also, quite frankly, what I see a lot is that investing in a long term strategy, investing in your people, investing in your purpose, investing in getting it right. That's just not a luxury that most leaders feel or think that they have.
Yeah.
Right. So they, with all the best intentions, they might kind of set course in that direction. But before you know it, if the results are not showing quickly enough, there will be the next one coming in saying that it's not the right strategy, and we'll start focusing on short-term results again.
And when things are changing so quickly, it's hard to really get that investment and buy-in for the long term. Like it takes a lot to stand your ground.
Yeah.
To say, no, believe me, this will turn around.
It will turn around.
But that's pretty hard. So we've gone from one end of the spectrum around traditional, authoritative, works well in hierarchical settings when fast decision making, that command control is required. That is a style that works well in profit first or profit driven companies. We've then gone all the way to the other end of the spectrum. That is more of that servant leadership, I think is what you called it. Being more there to serve that purpose and serve your people, and those long-term financial successes will come, but it is much more of a long-term piece.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that it has its challenges too. So, still in this, when we go back to the debate of profit, people, purpose, we're still in these two ends of the spectrum, it sounds like, of one versus the other.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder, is there a middle ground? And I think there is. So that was leading the witness question of I truly think there is a middle ground because I've lived it, I've breathed it, I've experienced it, I've seen it. But I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of, specifically how you do that from a tactics perspective strategy. But it does make me think of what's that middle ground from a leadership perspective. What's that leadership style?
Yeah. Yeah. So what's the style where you do not have to choose necessarily
Yeah.
between those components that we keep on referencing, right? And similar to you, I've been down that path too. Like when I was in my first leadership role, I was all over like results, profit. I had my boards all up with performance data and only to soon find out that it was not very motivating for my team and I was losing people, right? And I mean, not the least, it wasn't fun for me either.
Yeah.
And then in kind of as I grew as a leader, I started kind of focusing more on the people and the purpose side. And I even took that kind of to the extreme of self-managing teams. So I was really at the service of my people and was really focused on their growth and development, setting them up for success, getting to know them a lot more personally, and ultimately trying to make my own job redundant, right? That was what success looked like for me. And I although I felt more comfortable with the latter, I also felt the pressure of the organization around me. Like as long as the results were heading in the right direction, I didn't hear anyone complain about it, right?
But no one asked any questions.
As soon as there were any doubts, the skepticism was there, questions were asked, and I really had to fight for kind of this leadership style.
Yeah.
And then over the years, I have also felt kind of the need sometimes to go back to that other side and felt like I may have moved too much to one side. So all that to say, it's a great question. Like, what's that middle ground? What's the leadership style that kind of combines all of that? The company that comes to my mind is Patagonia. Like, can we look at them? They
good example.
They're profitable, while they are also still like huge advocates and for sustainability. In my opinion, that's one of the companies that really lives and breathes that purpose-driven mindset. And then they're really focused on employee engagement, employee well-being, and the customers love them for it and are willing to pay for it too, right? So it begs the question. We love our questions. No answers, just questions. It begs the question of like, is there a magic ingredient that companies like Patagonia add into that mix, kind of on top of the leadership styles that we've talked about already?
Yeah. And it's interesting. I expected to find a ton of organizations like Patagonia out there that they're, and what their leadership styles were. And it was harder than I would like to admit, given I feel so strongly about this. But I would say the best term I could find to describe what this mindset is that these leaders adopt to lead truly, purpose, people, and profit, holistically balanced organizations is human-centered leadership. And the interesting piece was the human-centered leadership. I think a lot of people just hear human and centered and they think people first, right?
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's kind of putting yourself in the middle of all of these different perspectives, priorities that you have to be able to manage. And yes, it is being empathetic and caring and realizing you are here to serve others to some extent. But the piece that I found the interesting, and of this, it's and these leaders do not hesitate to hold people accountable to truly delivering impact against people, purpose, and profit. And I think that's the interesting thing that balances it and can get confusing for some people is that being a human, an empathetic leader, but also not hesitating to say, hey guys, like these are our commitments to be able to realize our purpose goals. We got to stick to these as a group.
Yeah, I love that. Accountability. Accountability. It's one of my favorite words, the questions that I always ask, like who owns this,
Yeah.
right? Like who's accountable for this piece. So I love how you put that as an extra kind of factor or ingredient in that leadership style. I would argue, though, that servant leadership at its core or how it was intended, I think,
Mm.
had that in it
Mm-hmm.
too, right?
Fair.
But over time, I think the perception became that that's just more of a soft style of leadership,
Yeah.
and we started losing kind of that perspective of accountability and results.
Mm. Mm.
We kind of lost focus on that. So human-centered leadership is what you call it.
Mm-hmm.
I I I I can get on board with that. I can get on board with that. So it's not just about leaders being nice,
Yeah.
right? It's also about pushing people to take on challenges, challenging them to grow, to try new things,
You
to
got it.
get outside of their comfort zone,
Yeah.
and to hold them accountable
Yeah.
to their results.
Yeah.
And that might be the thing that actually makes a difference. Going back to kind of some of the research that I did, I think McKinsey put that really nicely. And let me just kind of read that quote to you. Human centered leadership gives people a sense of purpose and recognizes their ambitions. That doesn't just help leaders help their people, it can also boost the company's bottom line. So that also reminds me of the engagement research that we talked about earlier. Like putting that into perspective, like you should look at what is it that drives engagement.
Yeah.
And that too is proven to be not only being nice, building nice relationships and having great positive feedback conversations with one another, right? It's also often about like purpose alignment, the value adding. Do I, as an
Totally.
employee, really feel that I add value? Is it clear to me how I contribute to the results of the business? Things like growth and development are always part of that too. But accountability in a way, and whether that word is exactly used or not, I think shines through in that too. So when looking at those stats where it says companies with high engagement also drive higher profits, I think the condition for that is that leadership kind of is adding that magic ingredient of accountability to it, not just being the empathetic leader, but also really driving that accountability.
Yeah. And again, we've seen these three. And in my research, I was like, why am I not finding more examples of this? Again, like I think you said it before, it's really hard to do and to do well.
Yeah.
As if being a leader isn't tough enough sometimes. And like we need one more thing to think about. But it really makes me think about what are some of those challenges or why this doesn't come to life. And for all the reasons that you mentioned about being an empathetic leader, caring about your people, meeting them where they're at, understanding what motivates them, what makes them tick, how you can coach them, how you can develop them. Think about carving out all the time to be able to do that and do it well. Like that's a lot of time when most leaders are in back-to-back meetings, going from place to place, flying all over the place, like it's hard to fit that into your day. But if you prioritize it, I really do think, and I've seen it, it will pay off.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, with that accountability piece, I can see how that's so confusing for someone that you work with. Where at one moment, you're asking them, what are your development goals, really believing in them, like encouraging them to think differently, bigger, push their own abilities further, and, congratulating them on life milestones. But then you're also like, but you missed a big deadline.
Yeah.
What are we
Right.
going to do
Yeah.
about it? And they're like, what? Like you have to be able to do both. And I can see why it's really hard to swiftly do both.
Yeah, and I might be butchering this because I think it's an expression that I'm familiar with in Dutch, but it is kind of that concept of being hard on the results or hard on the
Mm,
task, and soft on the relationship or
mhm,
on the person. Um, and that might be a really difficult thing to balance as a
mm,
leader, and it might also be a difficult thing to deal with as the
mhm.
receiver on the
Yeah,
other end, right?
yeah,
And that's where we also need to do a reality check.
yeah.
Uh,
Here comes the reality
Here
check.
comes the reality check. Looking at that empathetic leadership
Mhm,
side of the things, 77% of organizations report leadership gaps.
mm,
94% of employees want empathetic leaders, yet 70 something 72% think that their leaders actually are.
interesting.
So that's a massive like perception
Mm,
gap, right? And I also have to always chuckle about kind of just seeing these isolated results of like 92% of people
yeah,
want an empathetic leader. Yeah,
yeah,
duh. Who doesn't want
yeah.
an empathetic
I
leader? Do
want
you
the
want
one
an
that yells
asshole
at me
for a
and is
boss?
mean
Yeah.
mean to me.
So,
Doesn't
but
care.
I trust, and I've read the research. It's obviously in a bit more context, but it does beg the question around what people want and
Mhm.
what their preferred style is
Yeah,
versus what they need,
yeah.
right? Like in a moment of crisis, would you want your leader to be very empathetic
Mm,
and engage you in everything and calm you
yeah,
down? Or do you want them to step up, set the direction, lead the
for
way,
sure.
and really stand up, or a little bit of both? Are we looking for this unicorn leader?
Yeah. It's a great point. And this is maybe where we become a bit annoying in our conversations or debates, where then we change our minds and look at it from a different way. And you're right. As a leader, it's really hard to be everything to everyone all at once. It sounds like that movie almost that was out a couple of years
Yes.
ago. But it's really hard to do that. And I think that for me is what I believe, is what human-centered leadership is not the belief that you have to be everything to everyone all at
Mhm.
once, but this is where situational leadership plays a part.
Yeah.
And that again is its own field, and kind of there's lots of research and stuff backing that up. And that's where that comes into play. So being a human-centered leader, you really need to be emotionally intelligent. I don't know what the term would be, to understand and respond in those moments to what is truly needed in that moment. So you may have to, in certain situations, based off of thinking about the people, the purpose of what you're doing, the situation, is it a crisis or not? You may have to lean into more of a traditional authoritative, like you gave a good
Mm.
example. And I've been on the receiving end of a crisis, and you're like, can you just not make a decision and stop polling the audience on everything? We don't have time to poll the audience. But there might be moments where you have to really lean in and be more of an empathetic, caring, and just pause and not talk about the day to day, but really hear
Yeah,
your
yeah.
people out and support them through whatever you're going through. So I do think each leadership style has its place. And that is where human centered leaders are able to flex to each of those. Again, probably easier said than done, but pulling up my buddy Paul, because we're on a first name basis, another thing he says a lot is leadership is not about power. It's not about you. The moment you
Mm.
realize it's not about you, but the people you're investing in and the purpose and the cause and what you're trying to achieve, that's when leadership thrives. It's about the impact, not the power.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that's kind of the where ego comes in,
Oh,
right? Like,
yeah.
and I think people often look at ego as a four-letter word,
Three
or
or
three.
3.
um, but I think it is something, especially in leadership, to really kind of
Yeah.
hone in on. So maybe we spend another episode, kind of
Yeah.
unpacking
Fair,
that
fair.
that concept.
But maybe let's rein us in, because 'cause we've gone
You're good
all
at
over the place.
that.
What's the point of all of this?
What's the point?
That we started off with this debate. People, purpose versus profit. And I think we both agreed that the debate isn't over. And while folks are still having that debate about how you achieve that, and I think there's a lot of evidence and proof out there around there is a place that you can have it all, you can balance them all, different strategies and tactics. But maybe the so what, or why are we even here talking today, that I think is a good takeaway is it's not just that, but it's also first focusing on what's the leadership mindset you need to be able to have it all as a company.
Right, and to bring that
Yeah.
to a success, yeah, and that does kind of bring us back to the start of like, what if we revise kind of that jumping right into action,
Mhm.
into taking a moment to reflect and pause. That's what you just said, and um, to our listeners, that's kind of what we always like to do. We hope that that you took something away from this conversation. But the one thing that I think everyone could do, like starting tomorrow, is next time you are facing a tough decision or a challenge, pause. Don't jump right into action, right? Take that step back, do some internal reflections, introspectives, and ask yourself three questions. So one is, how do I lead with purpose, and how do I stay true to what we are accountable for and stand for? Then there is two, what's the empathetic, the human way to respond to this, to approach this? What do the people around you actually need? And then three is, how do your decisions, when once you're kind of weighing which way to go, how do those decisions and actions affect your financial stability? So that's three questions that I would challenge everyone to just kind of, next time you're facing a tough decision, take a step back and ask yourself
That's
those
great.
three questions first. And as I'm talking, I just want to add a bonus
Because
there.
why not?
A bonus. Why not? Because I also do realize, and we said it, right? It's not easy. And
No.
it sounds a bit like a unicorn.
Mhm.
And we also talk about like different leadership styles a lot, and things that come more natural to you as a leader
Mhm.
versus things that you might be able to
Mhm.
develop over time.
Yep.
So, would also invite everyone to acknowledge and realize that if you want to drive this human-centered leadership mindset within your organization, you cannot do that alone. Like, it takes time for you to develop that, for it to become instinctual. So consider how you are also helping to develop your organization, to develop more of that human-centered leadership mindset, and help coach and develop others to get there, so that this mindset and this approach lives on
Yeah.
beyond you as a leader. It's a bonus. It's a big one.
That's a big bonus. But I mean, being a strong leader takes a lot. And to be the best, you want to take those little bonuses on. And I think it's a good one to add. But at the end of the day, while we're sitting here with two microphones, I feel really strongly, having worked this out,
Mm.
that the best leaders not just focused on what they're going to do in balancing people, purpose, and profit, but how they lead to achieve that.
And that, my friend, is how momentum is built.
Ooh, that sounds good. Well, I think on that note, that's a wrap. We have covered this topic from a lot of different angles, and hopefully, we've given some things for people to think about.
Yeah.
So, as you think about this conversation today, maybe you've accepted the challenge and the bonus, and you want to join the conversation, follow us on LinkedIn, drop comments in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And maybe you know somebody who is in a situation where they're struggling to balance these three things, and the secret sauce of human-centered leadership is just what will help them out. Feel free to share it. Thanks so much.
And we'll see you next time.